I think all of us in our own way suffer from survivor syndrome.
I was in that no man's land between the guard and the students.
The tear gas is so strong that I couldn't focus my camera. They could have fired right then. They were ready to fire.
Who were either rolling tape or continued to shoot when bullets were firing.
May 4th is just something we can't walk away from.
Where I was that day was in a very bad place. I was thoroughly depressed. I was not here Friday night, I was not here Saturday night, and I got here Sunday afternoon, and I didn't have any credentials. So there was even some activity Sunday night. On that day, I was out trying to redeem myself by trying to do a picture that showed student protest in America at the time in relation to the Cambodian invasion. I thought I missed all the news.
I was the news director at WKSU AM and FM at the time, and also the commercial station back then was called WKNT AM and FM, which is now WNIR Radio. I was discharged from the Vietnam War. I was over there twice and came to good old Kent State, and I worked on the radio station. I was a part of the Friday night situation downtown. Saturday, I was the ROTC building affair. When the governor flew in, I was the only one with a tape recorder on the day of Monday. As I was standing on top of Blanket Hill there, to my left was Taylor Hall, and the tape recorder running from this whole thing, and you can hear the war chants, and then the Jeep that moved in, the tear gas that was fired.
I was actually a sophomore in high school when I heard the shootings. I was listening to the radio and first heard about it, and I immediately thought, well, more of the same.
I go into Taylor Hall, and I understand that there's going to be a rally that day. I go out onto the apron outside Taylor Hall. I hear the bell start to ring. They're changing classes at this time. Crowds start to come and build up along the perimeter of the Commons, and there's a group of maybe, 100 people down on the Commons that are part of the main group. They're ringing the bell, they're cheering. And a Jeep comes out from the Kent Police, and a guy with a bullhorn says, "You must disperse, leave the Commons now." And they didn't. So a few minutes later, the guard starts to move. They start firing tear gas. The students start lobbing the tear gas canisters back at the guard, and the guard swings around and then drives the group up the south side of Taylor Hall, up the hill, and continue on around, meanwhile continuing to shoot tear gas, okay? Well, I'm moving ahead of that with that group up the hill, and the tear gas is so strong that I couldn't focus my camera. My eyes are watering, everything hurts. And I ducked in Taylor Hall, went up the steps, and came out on the balcony on the backside towards the practice field. I watched as the guard came around the end of Taylor Hall, continued to document this. They went down onto the practice field. Students continued to lob rocks at them and do other things. And they went into a kneeling position. They were ready to fire, but they didn't. They got up, they continued to move towards the pagoda, They were continued to fire some tear gas, and they went up the hill, and got to the pagoda, and as you know, they turned around and fired. The students, after the shooting took place, they could see that there were many of them were on the ground. I was stunned, and I looked around, and there was silence, and I noticed that many of them were stunned. They didn't, everybody was kind of looking at each other. Did this really happen?
Just about every one of those guardsmen was a student at some university. Why were they in the National Guard? They were there to avoid the draft. Simple as that. They were young kids. And that was one of the big issues. The main thing, in my opinion, is the fact that they had no riot control like this. They were trained as a military. And that's what I believe the sound of the shots there. You can see the lieutenant raising his handgun. He's the only one there. And there's one pop you can hear on the tape. And then that 67 shots were fired afterwards. They act as a military mind. One fires, they all fire.
I think the thing that you can't learn in school, and maybe Paul had some of these issues, that after the pictures were published, we had weeks and weeks at my house of phone calls and hate mail that just went on. And I think probably what bothered me the most of the whole incident is the folklore stories that sprung up about all 4 students that were killed. How diseased they were, how dirty. I mean, it was just sickening, incredible, just unpalatable stuff that was said, because someone had a cousin that was a nurse that knew the guy that put the so-and-so on a stretcher. It was just, just the hate, the just pure hate. And then I think coming just to this pure fact that no matter what you said or what you printed, there are people that will never, never believe anything you have to say. That as a young student of journalism, that was a real shock to me.
We learned that change is good. I think that if you look at change going on right now, it's good. I think that when you have change, you have to be prepared that it may have a price. It may cost you something. And in that case of May 4th, it did cost us something, 4 students' lives. And it is a tragedy.
I think part of the social commentary is that I was looking, when I looked through my photographs, and I'm sure when Paul looks through his and all those who were there that day, there was a definite lack of black students around the Commons that day. And that question came up many years ago. And someone told me that, no, we know. You see a guardsman, I come from like the Huff area, no, you don't hang around, you don't mess with it. But for a predominantly white population, that was a lesson that was learned that day. It's sad to say, but that in the social context, it's divided by races. They knew what was exactly going to happen.
Prior to that, a few days or a week, I can't remember now over time, the Black United students on this campus called a rally, and they walked off this campus. They didn't know it was going to be a shooting, but they know, and they're what they had told the public, and that was all tape recorded in there, was that something big is going to happen, and the black students here are not going to get blamed for it.
My problem was that I was out there to get my Student Protest in America picture, and I thought I really got my picture with Alan Canfor waving the black flag and the guardsmen pointing their rifles at him, and about 70 guardsmen in the background milling around. They go, this is it, an armed response to protest in America at this time in our American history. And 10, 15 minutes later that the actual shooting happened, it was time to leave campus. And I think the scariest thing I saw was driving towards Ravenna to get around campus back then, to get over on the other side where the University High School used to be, where my apartment was, to get some clothes and stuff and pack up and get out. I saw guardsmen on the telephone poles cutting the phone line and seeing that drop, and I'm going. And of course, while we were sitting on the Commons after the shooting, the initial radio report said 2 guardsmen, 2 students killed in a shootout. Made it sound like the OK Corral. Like there was a pitched gun battle going on here at Kent. I was trying to get on the AP network when I drove back to Pennsylvania, thinking my salvation was the state line, and But I knew, I could, you know, all you were looking for is a place to go with your film to trust somebody. Because I even think Bill Whitbeck back there, I think later on we found out about the guy that shot the film from the Tri-Towers. He thought he turned it over to us, and that turned up years later, right?
South, yeah.
Went south for until much later, like almost a decade. The film turned up. 8mm film of the actual shooting incident. So I just wanted to go to a place where I could trust the film would be cared
Right to
for.
the top,
Yeah, the Valley Daily Dispatch.
Where'd you go, John? The credits on the pictures.
Yeah. Well, there was an argument there because they wanted to hold it till the next day, and I said, no, that's not why I came.
I want to say one thing about the photographers, though, that a lot of young people might not know is that the FBI and right up to the White House were employing people to take photographs of protesters back then. It was all this whole COINTELPRO. They were scared to death and paranoid about outside professional agitators coming in and riling up people. You can argue about whether anybody came from outside Kent or not that weekend, but the fact is that students were very, worried about, somebody like Paul taking photos and thinking he might be from the police, which is why they were giving him issues about it. And I don't know if John, you had come across that before too, but that was an issue, and both sides being very kind of paranoid about who was taking photographs of it.
About the rubber bullets or the real bullets in here. I don't know if you understand this, they were National Guardsmen. They were not U.S. Army soldiers. And secondly, they had just been out on the streets guarding bridges across the state of Ohio for a major trucker strike. They used real bullets because rednecks were on bridges shooting scab drivers. And that was very serious. There was a lot of people killed and shot in that. They were ready to go home. They came in here at a second's notice. The governor sent them here. The half-track came in, as he mentioned, and all of a sudden, we're under siege by the guardsmen.
The military just don't walk around with blanks. They don't bother carrying blanks. They carry bullets or they don't. And in fact, we have tape of guardsmen talking on Sunday night and Saturday night saying, well, of course we have live ammunition. I mean, it was out there if somebody bothered to ask. It takes a lot of steps to kind of examine that tape, which I've done. But one simple thing is just visually, it works audibly the same way. Where things are closer to you, they're bigger or they're louder. The farther away, they're smaller or they're quieter. And from that tape, you can clearly tell from the building it was recorded, from Johnston Hall, from the window there, that the closest people to you that are being picked up without really yelling are students. He's claiming they're guardsmen. Then you hear gunshots far in the distance that are suddenly guardsmen again. So within like seconds, guardsmen were here, and then now they're 30 yards away. So that alone tells you it's not true. But also, if you listen to what the students are saying underneath the window, it's the same thing they were saying on Sunday night and Friday night, which are things like get in here, get in the dorm, as a way of getting away from the tear gas and getting away from the guard. So that's what was being yelled. He's trying to claim that they said, get here right now, point, which is not a military command anyways, point, and that sort of thing. So just throw that out the window. I even talked to Alan about it when I was working in Cleveland. I said, Alan, there's no order to shoot on that tape. And he went like this to me. Smiled, and then he said, well, let people decide themselves. But he just was looking for a publicity spike, and he got it. But unfortunately, that story has been picked up by the press. It's out there, it's on the internet, and now people are already deciding, well, it must be there. I guess this guy said he heard it.
I hate to say this, but Alan's made a lot of statements over the years. And until he can come forth with proof, he's had so many other things like this. I'm not against Alan, but I think some of us here know that he's tended to exaggerate at times.
Can you imagine if this had happened today? A beautiful day like this, same temperature, same day, you know, very much like May 4th, 1970. The difference in the coverage. The message may have been the same that you got out, but can you imagine doing it with your video phones, with your flip videos, with your little cameras, with everything? It would have been an unbelievably documented event today.
We all think that everybody would be there taking pictures of this. And beforehand you would have, and maybe 10 minutes later, maybe you would have gotten up off the ground and started taking pictures. But I want to really hand it to people like Paul and John and Bob and Steve over there, who were either rolling tape or continued to shoot when bullets were firing. Steve got up off the ground, and the first thing he did was start his tape recorder, and he was even able to catch some of the shooting still going on. Now, if I'm being shot at, I'm not even thinking about any of that stuff. I'm crawling under a bush somewhere. But these guys kept shooting and taking pictures and recording, and that's kind of where the professional journalism comes in.
I was meeting my wife, Madeline. We were married there on Blanket Hill in front of Taylor Hall for lunch. And that's when like everything started with the bells and shooting of the tear gas, and of course we got gassed, so we went into Taylor Hall, and we were passing out wet rags to people who were overcome by gas when the shootings occurred.
I had been working on several different projects at once. I was feeding to the AP as a stringer. I was feeding to the New York Times as a stringer. I had been the campus correspondent. I had just finished my editorship at the Daily Kent Stater and turned it over to somebody else. So each night of the violence in Kent, I was in that no man's land between the guard and the students, getting tear gassed along with everybody else. So that I could do my recording, and I was also carrying a tape recorder. So when the shooting actually took place, I was on, instead of being in that no man's land, I was on front campus when word came into the news bureau that there was shooting.
I rushed down to campus on the Monday morning. Graduate teaching assistant, so I had a sports jacket on and a tie, and I wanted to see the ROTC building, so I started to wander down there, and a guardsman tried to stop me. He said, "I'm sorry, nobody can go through," and I said, "What, not even faculty?" He said, "Oh, excuse me." So I knew right away they didn't know what they were doing. I was outside watching the assembly beginning, and when the guardsman finally started to come up, and I saw one of the guardsmen rifle butting a student, I knew that personally it was time for me to get out from the outside and go into the inside of Taylor Hall.
We suddenly realized we were not only out of school, we were out of work, because between my wife and I, we had 3 jobs on campus that were paying our rent and our food. Luckily, I had been accepted for a job at the Mansfield News Journal. It was due to start in mid-June, so I called them up right away and said, you know, any possibility I can come down and start? And they said, yeah, when would you like to start? I said, how about tomorrow? I was not comfortable with what was going on, what people were saying. It was very disturbing. And I had always wanted to go to like Australia and my wife didn't want to go that far, so I said, let's go to Canada. So we literally packed up about in September and went up to Ontario, and I looked for a job and got a job as a reporter up there. One of the things that did happen was I was applying for a job as a public relations reporter or a writer for a community college in Canada, and I'm in the interview with the president, and in the middle of the interview, he pulls out Michener's book on Kent State and lays it on the desk. And he said, "What do you think of this?" And I was trying to avoid, kind of direct confrontation. So I said, "I think it's a very thick book." So it kind of went downhill from there. He was a strong believer in the right of the government to control student protests, and I obviously disagreed with him, and I didn't get the job.
A couple of weeks before the events of May, the recruiters came through the journalism school to pluck the fresh fruit. And the Beacon Journal made me a terrific offer of $5 less a week than I made as an intern at the Associated Press. So I turned them down. It turned out to be a fairly difficult job market at the time. And not because of the events of Kent State, but because of the economy. I never had any, or I wasn't aware of any repercussions of the Kent State connection, rather than curiosity. But I wasn't running into editors or superiors who backed away because of the connection. Rather, they wanted to hear more about it.
Fortunately, somebody put me on to, you talk about having a tough time in Mansfield. I went to the bastion of conservative life in Ohio, the Canton Repository. And we had many a very, very, very strong argument with the folks there about what happened and whether it was a riot and this and that. I mean, we wasted a lot of copy paper and ink just sitting there typing out diatribes that we knew weren't going to get printed in the paper.
For those of you who were too young to know what it was like, not just here, but throughout the country in 1970, the country was coming, politically and socially, was coming apart. Everyone, you either were on one side or you were on the other. You didn't get an opportunity to discuss anything. It was hardliners on the right, hardliners on the left. Does this sound familiar today?
Yes.
Well, what's going on today with those town hall meetings and with the marches about the Arizona law? It's minor compared to the stress and the angst that was going on in this country in those days over the Vietnam War. And that was just magnified here on campus because you had political activists who were intent upon pushing a particular philosophy and taking political action and bringing the war home and taking it to the streets and all the other jargon that went with it. And on the other side, you had our seniors, I mean, not senior students, but those who are parents and our faculty, who might have taken the other side of it, and you also had students who would take the other side of it. You could not discuss these issues. You were on one side or the other. It's the same kind of rhetoric and the same kind of fear-mongering going on both sides of the issue that we had back then. But this is just what you have today is a smidgen of the intensity of what was happening back then.
Canada is different. They have their arguments, they have their political parties, they have their passions, but they don't blow things up and they don't shoot people. In Canada, they talk it to death. I mean, you know, when we were there in 1970, the Quebecois, the separatists, people in Quebec, wanted to separate from Canada. And it's like it disappeared 10, 12 years ago because they talked about it for 28 years. And pretty well everybody died that wanted to. And they just take a different perspective. They have the passions, they have the same problems we do, but they don't think, you know, everything has to be solved with violence.
And the thing about now is that we have, on the one hand, so much more information available, so much more quickly than we had it before, which means that it's difficult to do filtering. There's a lot of stuff that comes out there that's plain out wrong or inflammatory, whatever. And whether you're in the business or just strictly an individual, you've got to be able to sort it out. And I find it amazing that as brilliant as we all are these days with Twitter and tweeting and all the other fun stuff, but dot connecting 101 should still be a mandatory course in living, because back then folks didn't get what was going on, and today they don't get what's going on either.
I think like going to Canada was basically trying to run away from the whole situation and the memory, which you know, I had wanted to travel, but I just can't describe how, you know, claustrophobic I felt at that time. I think all of us in our own way suffer from survivor syndrome, where, you know, we escaped, we knew those that didn't, and you know, you just come across it. Most of the people I talked to did not return to campus for 15 years. I didn't come back for 25 years. I just really couldn't bring myself to come back here.
I don't think a day has gone by since May 4th of 1970 that the events of that day haven't been in my thoughts. To say those days were traumatic would be an understatement. To say they weren't important to me would be an understatement. There are places, I love this campus. I had a great 4 years here. I had a wonderful time on the Stater. It was some of the best camaraderie, the best fun, the best reporting, the best training I could have had. But there are places on campus I find it very difficult to walk. Even 40 years later.
May 4th is just something we can't walk away from. It does live with us each and every day. Perhaps the way it affects us doesn't show itself on the outside, but probably it certainly does on the inside. We are scarred. Coming back every year is difficult, but I do it, and I'm glad that we have the candlelight march around campus. And it's comforting to come back, or it was anyway, to come back to Taylor Hall and visit all the old facilities and come back to the newsroom, and sometimes I would come back here and get to help one of the journalism students work out a story, something like that. So the memories are great, but Kent State will always, it just will be there. It's just that we were there, we experienced it, and when people talk to me, you know, yeah, I'm a survivor. I was at Kent State, and you can't block that out from reality.
Some of us came back for the 25th, and one of the things we realized was that the Stater and the Burr, which was the yearbook at the time, had been such a great group. We decided to hold a reunion of the Stater Burr people on the 30th anniversary. So the three of us organized this reunion with the help of Maggie and a few other people, and I think we got like 98 people coming back. It spanned the years. And one of the first things we realized the very first night was because of May 4th, we had never gotten a chance to say goodbye. I mean, we were there 1 minute, and the next we were all gone our separate ways. And although some of us had stayed in touch with each other, we had totally just never had a chance to say goodbye, never had a chance to mourn together. And we did it, you know, for that 30th anniversary.
Two years ago, I was in Tel Aviv with my fiancée, went out to dinner, and a young man asked us where we were from in the United States, and we said, Ohio. He said, oh, my favorite song is "4 Dead in Ohio." And Ruth and I looked at each other, and then we had to explain, and it wasn't any less painful 40-some years later to tell this man what happened and what that song was, than to have been there on May 4th in 1970.
Tin soldiers and Nixon's coming.